The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. I'm Charles Christian, and thank you very much for tuning in again. This week we're exploring a little bit of pop culture as we talk to Dan Hill about decoding the faces of famous people, the stars of movies, music, sport, television, and even politicians. They may look happy, shiny people on the silver screen, but inside they are often scared, resentful, angry, or just plain crazy. But before we go any further, we have had a reader request. Could we shed any light on a local mystery? Well, local to where this studio is based here in Norfolk, England. Namely, the mystery of the Madhouse Plantation, which is located in the middle of the Stanta military training area near the town of Thetford. The answer is yes we can and yes we will. We're just finalising our research and we'll have a report in an upcoming episode of this show. We haven't had any spells recently, but here is an anti-bullying one called the bully off spell. That just might come in handy for all those people now returning to work and kids returning to school after the lockdown. What's intriguing about this spell is it's available as a DIY kit from the Cat and Cauldron, a witchcraft store in the magical town of Glastonbury in England. Like all magic, this spell is designed to empower you to make changes in the world around you. In this case, by putting you in a positive mindset to overcome bullies. Indeed, throughout the ritual, you need to focus on your intent, which is to live a happy life without being bullied. So focus on the positive effects, such as a stress-free life, rather than being negative and dwelling on the bully. And please note, this is not a spell to cause harm to your bullies, just to get them out of your space. The bully off kit includes pretty much everything you'll need to perform the spell: a small jar of essential oils, a bag of incense, a good quality black beeswax candle, a small blue fabric pouch containing a secret blend of spices, and a small piece of polished black agate, which is a grounding and protective crystal. And there are also 3 small charcoal discs. The only thing missing is an incense burner suitable for burning charcoal discs, which you'll have to provide yourself. Oh yes, and most importantly, there is a scroll which contains the instructions for the spell. First off, anoint the candle with the essential oil. This is the hand-blended bully off oil. To do it, just dab the oil on your fingers and lightly coat the outer surface of the candle. Then, place one of the charcoal discs in the incense burner and light it. This may take a little while until you've got the charcoal hot enough, but once it's turned hot and grey, place a pinch of incense on the burner and also light the candle. Incidentally, all the while you are taking these preparatory steps, you should be focusing your mind on why you are carrying out this spell. Now for the spell proper. Take the piece of black agate and draw it through the smoke coming off the incense burner. In other words, you waft it backwards and forwards through the smoke. As you do, recite the following words. May he or she, it's up to you, you can even give them their name if you like, who I wish to be rid of, pass from me and not return, pass from me and not return, pass from me and not return. Do this, the holding of the agate over the incense and reciting the wording of the spell, a total of 3 separate times, and all the while focusing upon your intent, which is to have a happy life free from the negativity and unhappiness that the bully brings. As you do this, stare at the crystal and envision it turning into a bright white light, shining positivity on you and banishing the dark, baleful influence of the bully from your life. This process is known as charging the agate crystal, and once you've completed the 3 repetitions of the spell, place the crystal back in its bag with the herbs and put it somewhere safe in your home to do its work. As with all spells, you should only attempt it when you have a calm moment, when you know you'll not be disturbed and there'll be nothing to distract you from the magic. The spell kit costs £17 or $21 and can be ordered, along with a whole host of other magical supplies and paraphernalia. Better watch your credit cards, a lot of attractive stuff there, from www.witchcraftshop.co.uk. Now for this week's guest interview. Dan Hill, PhD. He's an internationally recognised expert on the role of emotions in politics, business, sports and popular culture, and has spoken to audiences in over 25 countries. To capture and quantify emotions, Dan has pioneered the use of facial coding, the analysis of facial expressions, in market research starting in 1998, and his company, Sensory Logic Inc., has done work for over half of the world's top 100 consumer-oriented B2C companies, which if you're in marketing will mean something to you. Dan is the author of a number of books, but the one we're focusing on today is Famous Faces Decoded, a guidebook for reading others. Now here's the interview. And it's my great pleasure to be talking to Dan Hill, and he's the author of the book Famous Faces Decoded, and it's basically a guidebook for reading other people via their facial expressions, which either reveal or try to disguise their true emotions. Would that be a reasonable summary of it?
That is pretty good, Charles. I mean, as your countryman George Orwell said, by the time he's 50 years old, a man has the face he deserves. We do have characteristic facial expressions. We have muscle memory, and over time, who you are tends to come out on your face.
Yeah. What got you interested in the topic?
In 1998, I was trying to write, or ghostwrite really, a book for my company's president. That put me in contact with a guy at IBM who changed my life. One day he sent over an article from a now deceased Cornell University publication talking about the breakthroughs in brain science and how much we are intuitive, emotional decision makers. The killer statistic, the conservative estimation, at least 95% of our mental activity isn't fully conscious. In other words, we're basically floating around in life, dimly aware of what's happening to us, including emotionally. And I went, well, that's pretty true.
Yes.
And that's pretty fascinating. And no one in business is acknowledging this fundamental reality. And I don't know if I can make any money in it, but I'm going to go ahead and explore it just because I can't resist.
Right. In your book, you uses your examples, famous people, TV personalities, political, sports personalities, and the like. What was your interest in them? The fact that they are, in some instances, trying to present one image to the public, but in reality, there's something else underneath.
Well, there is that aspect to it which makes it more difficult. There's certainly a public persona. When I went through and analyzed these famous people, first of all, I tried to take people in most cases who I thought were legitimately famous. They actually accomplished something in their lives.
Yes.
They were notable movie stars, rock musicians, authors, political figures. I didn't like to take people who were simply famous for being famous.
Yeah.
So I did put in the Kardashian sisters, but I didn't really necessarily want to. But I knew my readers, at least in some cases, would want that.
Yes.
So I went a lot more with the people who are of some substance, but it did create tricky moments because obviously you've got the paparazzi and you've got to find the moments where you think it's a bit more candid. It's not so staged. Sometimes photographs of their childhood before they became famous is more helpful. But I always try to stick with when they're most in the limelight, because obviously some people, as they age and are no longer famous or really in the heart of their career, that would be a different person potentially. I wanted the person as you knew them best in front of the camera, on the screen, etc.
We'll go into your methodology in a moment, but one of the things is obviously that the impression, the image they want to create is not necessarily the image they're actually creating, is it?
Yeah, well, there's a big argument going on right now about who is the real Ellen DeGeneres. And apparently a lot of people are now coming forward to saying, off the set, away from the cameras, she's a pretty mean and crabby person.
Yes.
So I don't have access to that. I would say that she's done a very admirable job in front of the camera, because even when I looked for candids, I ended up calling her what I refer to as a joybird, someone who tends to tilt heavily into having full expressions of happiness, where not just the corners of the mouth lift and the cheeks lift, but you also get that tightening of the muscle around the eye, which causes the twinkle in the eye. So she's got the twinkle, she's got the champagne look, but apparently offset, she's an angry little munchkin.
I like that. So anyway, let's talk about the methodology, because you kindly sent me a copy of the book and I've read that. I'm guessing it's available on Amazon and all usual sources.
That would be true.
Yeah.
I think the real interesting place to start with facial coding is none other than Leonardo da Vinci. Him and Michelangelo really made their advances in part because they got obsessed with dissection, with anatomy. Michelangelo went the route of the body until the Pope told him to cut it out.
Yeah.
In Leonardo da Vinci's case, he really was interested in the face. He wanted to know which facial muscle movements caused which emotions. I think it's why the Mona Lisa is such a rich painting, because she actually shows not just the proverbial Mona Lisa smile. She actually also shows contempt and sadness and anger in the face. So there's a lot going on there, and nobody was a better facial coder for probably 2 centuries than what Da Vinci accomplished. The next person down the turnpike was none other than your country person, Charles Darwin. First scientist to take emotions seriously. He realized or figured out that in your face, you best reflect and communicate your emotions. He took it seriously because he figured if emotions didn't help us survive and thrive, they would have been weaned out of us over the course of evolution. And then obviously I didn't have a chance for a conversation with Charles Darwin when I started my company. Fortunately for me, there was a man named Paul Ekman, a disciple of Darwin, and Ekman had gone through and systematically figured out which muscle movements correspond to which emotions. He's a top 20 psychologist in the world. It took him about 13, 15 years in the 60s and 70s to put this system together, along with a fellow professor at the University of California, San Francisco.
You've got a range of emotions that you talk about, and some of them, people tend to think, happy or sad, but you've sort of split them rather more into more detail, haven't you?
I have. I mean, let's take the most obvious emotion, which is quite common, which is happiness. I really look at it at 4 different levels. So I just mentioned joybirds, the Ellen DeGeneres type. That's in the penthouse of happiness on the top floor. If you come down a few floors, then you've got what I call pleasure, where just the cheek muscles really lift a lot. Satisfaction, I sometimes also think of as the social smile. It's not such a broad smile. You're kind of pasting it on. You're looking pleasant enough, mugging for the cameras. And then the bargain basement of happiness is what I call the acceptance smile. It's rather brief. It can be on one side of the face only, so it's unilateral. It's not very intense. And this is the expression, by the way, that I think the paparazzi have driven a lot of the Hollywood types into, because when I looked over the 4 generations from kind of like the silent generation, the 40s and 50s people, till today. The one biggest trend line difference was that the happiness started coming down from the penthouse and was a lot more in the basement instead, a lot more begrudging acceptance of the paparazzi, as in, this is the worst joke I ever heard, but at least you tried to humor me. Mm-hmm. That kind of happiness.
Putting on the instant smile for the camera type of thing.
Yeah, or even the begrudging smile, at least the social smile, which I call satisfaction's up a notch, but the begrudging smile is pretty much get out of my face, but I'll give you a wan little smile. There's a wonderful line in a Thomas Hardy poem where it's two lovers who are at the end of their relationship, and one person says to the other, basically, the smile on your face was the deadest thing with strength enough to die. That is essentially the kind of smile we're talking about.
Right. Your methodology, again, going back to that, you've broken it down into what people think various personalities are displaying and what they actually are displaying.
Yes.
Talk me through that.
Well, it started, the idea for that started in the fact that I used to go to conferences and I would make it really easy for people and say, here are the 7 core emotions you can capture through facial coding. I would list the emotions and then I'd give a one-word summary of what the emotion was about, what its meaning is, essentially. And I'd put up on the screen. I wouldn't even play games and have 8 options with 7 to match. Just straight up, here are 7 and match them up. And I found that people, even good, smart people in the business community who were analysts, only had an emotional literacy of about 35%. And I went, oh my God. And the first time I did this, I couldn't believe it. So I did it like 2 or 3, maybe 4 more times. It was always basically the same sort of score. So in this book, I said, well, let me take even one step further. Let me now apply this to these celebrities. And again, the accuracy rate was about 35%. In other words, people are not Sherlock Holmes, they are Watson. And they are not very good detectives of what's going on for others.
Yeah, because, I mean, you're talking about things like camouflage and all these other things. Yes.
Yeah, so I was like, you got to be kidding me. When I surveyed people, I allowed people to not give the results for a celebrity they didn't feel they knew well enough. So this is just the people who thought they knew Adele, who were quite likely fans of Adele. And amazing to me, they thought that her 2 most characteristic emotions were joy and then kind of broad happiness. Well, in fact, they're disgust and sadness. I mean, she struggles with her weight issues. She's, put out songs basically suggesting that it's a miracle that she's still alive, that she's gone through enough depression. She's not very fond of the paparazzi and the media in general. So disgust as an emotion typically shows in things like your nose wrinkles, something stinks. Your upper lip curls because something tastes bad to you. I think she essentially finds being in the limelight, the publicity, is kind of distasteful. It's kind of toxic to her. And then you got that underlying sadness that even success and fame, and riches has not resolved. So that's what's really going on for Adele. And amazingly, people just thought she was a happy camper.
When you're talking, just looking at one of your pages, you have what people voted as their characteristic and then what their actual one is. And then you also talk about what is a rare feature. So I've just got Jay-Z up here and it's voted happiness and contempt, actual sadness and fear, and rare satisfaction. That's sort of really misjudging people, isn't it?
Yeah, no, people are incredibly erroneous. It's almost that they want to be lied to. They just, we don't see very clearly. I mean, we don't see ourselves very clearly, and we also don't see other people very clearly. I've been watching this documentary about Bill Gates called Inside Bill's Brain the last couple of nights, and I can tell you that Bill's a smirker. Now he's doing wonderful work for the WHO, related to polio and all sorts of other issues. And that's great stuff. But Bill always knew he was super smart and very much a workaholic. Mm-hmm. And, he is famous for saying that's the stupidest idea I ever heard, back in the day when he was at Microsoft. A judge who reprimanded him called him, arrogant and Napoleon complex. That's Bill Gates. He was the number one smirker in the book. And that's a little less true now, perhaps, but it's still there. On the other hand, what does Gates not show? He is not given to fear. There's just, one person in the show. That's what I said in my book. And then on the documentary I was watching last night, one guy who knows him as a close friend said, my God, we'll be going down a hill on our bicycles and he has no fear. He'll go as fast as he can down the hill with never thought to the possibility he could wipe out. So in terms of my facial coding, I went, bingo, you got it.
Yes.
Good day, gentlefolk. I doth have breaking news. Your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, has written a new book called Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. 5 shocking true tales that are stranger than fiction. There's murder, mayhem, treason, incest, adultery, and worse. Read about the real antics of 9 saints. Yes, saints. 8 kings and 5 queens of England, plus the wickedest of all stepmothers. And be amazed, or horrified, or appalled, or all 3. If you love weird history, and methinks you do, hop over to Amazon for your copy of Charles Christian's Saints and Sinners in Dark Age England. Grab yours now.
Give us some other examples of personalities who, if you like, their public persona is really not what people imagine it to be. I mean, there's an interesting thing you've got here on the Beatles' emotions through the years, from their formative years to their breakup years.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the book because I admit to being a huge Beatles fan all the way through. And as well as I thought I knew the Fab Four, I mean, a lot of this was taken from photographs available to me from their career, the prime of their career. And obviously they were having a lot of success and sometimes enjoying it and sometimes mugging for the camera, especially John Lennon.
Yeah.
But Harrison, on an underlying basis, I always thought of him as the quiet Beatle, the one who, wrote, give me love, give me peace on earth, and my sweet Lord. And I kind of thought of him as a gentle soul. I essentially bought into the persona in a lot of ways. But the real George Harrison, I would argue emotionally, is a lot more like the guy who wrote the song Taxman. He's angry. And the lips are pursed together, the eyebrows pulled down and knit together. After I'd done this and came to this revelation, I went back and read some more, and I came across Ringo Starr saying, yes, I never knew which George would show up in the studio. Some days he could be a rather pleasant chap, and other days, watch out. He would strike out at you verbally and maybe even physically, just possibly. I think one of the reasons he got into into India and the Hare Krishna stuff, etc., was because he felt like he had to make a change. And after he made at least something of a change, then you had songs like While My Guitar Gently Weeps. But early on, you had songs like, Think for Yourself, Don't Bother Me, Taxman, etc. That was the initial real George Harrison emotionally.
What about sadness? Looking at your top 10 of the most sad, they appear to be mainly men and an awful lot of politicians in there.
Well, we might as well go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room, and that would be our president, Donald Trump. So, because I'm talking to you here from the States.
Yes.
So, the thing that really surprised me about Donald is, coming from the outside, I would have said to myself, okay, well, the guy's pretty angry. And he is pretty angry, and especially the intensity of the anger that he's prepared to show in public vastly exceeds the norm of U.S. presidents in the past. Just like he talks in superlatives all the time, well, he goes to anger at a really intense level. There's a strong correlation there. But when I really started looking at the guy, what popped out as where he really deviated from the norm, not just of U.S. presidents, but all the 173 celebrities in the book, was on sadness, followed by disgust. He's actually a profoundly sad person. And it makes a lot of sense when I started thinking about him and reading more about it. So from a psychological point of view, it's so often true that your early childhood, really matters. It's very formative.
Mm-hmm.
I love this saying that, you can work really hard to raise a child the first 2 years, or you can work really hard the next 20. In Trump's case, his mom fell ill when he was a young child, and she was essentially not emotionally available to him. It would not be erroneous to say that he had an absent mother and a workaholic dad, and to a fair extent, TV was really his wet nurse. and he's still obsessed with TV. He does not have a lot of friends in life. He never has. Being a braggart and a bully does not tend to make people want to hang out with you a whole lot. And his most characteristic expression, bar none, is when his chin rises up. It's called a chin thrust or a chin raiser. And that is an expression of the two emotions he shows most, followed by anger. So that is sadness and disgust, and anger are the three emotions that gesture shows. But he will also get a wince in the cheek. He is in so many ways a man full of grievances. And I think, being a narcissist, the deepest grievance for Donald Trump is he wants everyone to recognize that he's the stable genius that he purports to be.
Yes. Richard Nixon is in there in the listing, Hillary Clinton, also Tiger Woods. And Tiger Woods' private life has exploded. That rather explained some of his emotions. But what about Hillary Clinton then?
Sure. Well, we had two sad sacks running for president in 2016. In Hillary Clinton's case, you can go, first of all, back to her father, who was a bully himself. He would chastise the family by doing things like turning off the heat in their house in the wintertime in Chicago when she was a child, or he would take their toothbrushes and toothpaste and throw them out onto the snow on the front lawn. The guy was a bully. He was also a really deceitful person and a penny pincher. So that's the father she had. And then she marries someone who's, endlessly not faithful to her. So, it's a pretty easy setup for you're not being totally happy in life. I think where she's happiest is really studying the policy papers. She's a policy wonk. Bill Clinton was more the people person. She was the policy wonk, and I think it showed up on the campaign trail. She didn't love to be on the campaign trail in 2016. She liked the red velvet ropes that kept the crowd away from her. Most times in U.S. elections, which go on for dreadfully long periods of time, most times the candidate who actually enjoys a crowd tends to prevail. So it's, in that sense, it's little wonder she lost to Trump, who loves nothing more than an adoring crowd.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
On the least sad one there, you've got Martha Stewart. Now, obviously, she's made a lot of money, but, things went terribly wrong for her and she ended up doing jail time. So, that's a bit of a surprise one. Kate Winslet, she's had various issues, and Jackie Onassis.
Yeah, Onassis surprised me because certainly after the assassination of her husband, or whoever killed him, whether it was Oswald or someone else, we will never know. But she stayed in her townhouse in Georgetown, hardly went out, couldn't stand the tour buses that would come by. I mean, I know her story fairly intimately because preceding me is another facial coder in the family, actually. Clint Hill is a relative of mine, and he's the Secret Service agent who tried to save Kennedy in Dallas in '63. He's the guy who's jumping on the back of the limo. Yeah. And I've met with Clint several times, and he wasn't a complete facial coder. He said, I was outnumbered by a crowd. He said, what I was looking for was anger. With the lips pursing together, an angry glint with narrowed eyes, the eyebrows down. Was there someone who was a threat in the crowd? So certainly he knows Jackie really well. He was assigned to Jackie initially. It's why he was in Dallas. So she was sad, but ultimately she pulled out of that and had a pretty good life, and she was reasonably happily married and was glad for a president who was also bookish like she was. It's a little surprise that she wanted to become an editor. They both had that in common. So despite a perception that she's that famous widow, I would say in a lot of ways she's better off. Martha Stewart's a different case. Martha Stewart, I think, does not suffer from loneliness because she's always got a companion, and that companion is her ambition. She works and works, and then she works some more. As I said in the book, it's funny that she would call, one of her magazines Martha Stewart Living. It should really have been called Martha Stewart Working.
Yes.
That's what she did all the time.
What about other people who, when you analyze them, produced surprising results For example, I mean, you talk about Johnny Cash, the story about his background, his older brother's premature death and his father picking on him and saying, you should be more like your brother and you're a lazy no account and shiftless and things. You can understand why that's given people issues. What about ones where it's a complete surprise, the way they've actually turned out?
Well, I mean, I think lots of people are surprised. One that got my attention was I'm a big fan of Humphrey Bogart, not just Casablanca, but many of his movies. And I just kind of said, well, maybe he's playing a role. He's always, he's really the guy in the movie who doesn't get the girl. She goes off on the plane and he stays behind with the Vichy French.
Yes.
Well, that role fit him perfectly because it turns out that his parents were very Victorian. They thought that being affectionate to your children was, a luxury item or practice and not to bother with. And his most characteristic expression, which is very revealing of sadness, is when the inner eyebrows pull together but upward. It also can give away fear and surprise, but it's a really good tell for sadness. And there is something perpetually forlorn about Humphrey Bogart. So I didn't know that going in. If you'd asked me before I started coding, if I would have thought, Bogart was sad, I probably would have said that he was more angry because he ends up in most of his movies punching someone.
Yes.
The sadness is there. The fear is actually there in part because of that expression. And people like me, they did get the sadness right, but they always, like me, picks anger as his second most characteristic emotion. That's really not particularly in play for Bogart.
Is there a difference in emotions between the sexes? Do men tend to veer towards one set of emotions and women to another, or? There
are some distinct differences. So first of all, I don't think listeners are going to be surprised to learn that men index higher on anger on average.
Mm-hmm.
It is an emotion about wanting to be in control of your destiny, to potentially hit out, make progress. That seems to fit the male psyche, unfortunately, well. Although I will argue that anger has its benefits as well. I mean, you might want to fight against an injustice, for instance, to make progress on something. But if you look from just the percentage differences between men and women, the biggest one is contempt. And contempt is where the corner of the mouth pulls up and out. It's kind of like a smirk. Snidely Whiplash, the cartoon character, is the embodiment of contempt. There is an upside to contempt, which is definitely true of guys as well as the downside. I'd say the upside is you're cocky. There's a swagger to you. Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin was a man of contempt. He strutted across the stage,
mm-hmm.
and contempt is a sense of superiority. You're above it all and so forth. Where contempt gets a little bit more negative and so forth is it can also be that you don't trust others. You don't respect others. To go to another musician, Prince would be a good example of this. He famously tangled with his record company,
mm-hmm.
Didn't trust anybody, basically. The guy ended up not leaving a will. And so that, I live here in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So as best I know, that thing is still going through probate court, trying to figure out who's going to get how much money. So it turned into a real mess, all because he essentially didn't trust anybody. And ironically, it's all getting up with the lawyers he doesn't trust handling it.
Yes.
So there's upside and downside to most emotions, but that's the real difference. Now, as a facial coder, because there are studies on this as well, women generally are better facial coders, better observers of feelings than guys, but it comes down almost entirely based on one emotion. Women are twice as good on average as guys at detecting sadness. And from a kind of evolutionary psychology point of view, that might make sense. Think about a guy. Once upon a time, what were you? Out on the plains,
mm-hmm.
hunting wild animals.
Yep.
Sadness as emotion tends to make you slow down. Physically, mentally, you ponder things. Something went wrong. You're trying to figure out how you're going to fix it. Well, on the hunt, someone moving more slowly is not an attribute the fellow hunters are going to be too fond of. So it's no surprise that that's one that guys don't stop and wait for. Women, on the other hand, would have traditionally probably been in a campfire situation, huddled with the children, the other women. They want to know if their child's in distress. Displays of sadness could be a really good indication of that. Now, Bogart's parents didn't care if he was sad, but good parents would care. And I think it's not a surprise that women would be better at that.
One of the things that's very interesting is where you put pairs of people together. So, for example, you've got Mick Jagger compared with Keith Richards.
Jagger's very upbeat. I mean, not everyone knows this. I didn't know this until I started digging into the earlier lives of a lot of these people. In Jagger's case, his father, of course, was a rather famous gymnast on TV there in London. And so Jagger kind of grew up with a successful dad, a dad who liked the limelight, liked the cameras, liked the stage. His son proved to be the same way. And Jagger's very geared toward joy, the champagne version of happiness, and to surprise. His eyes are wide open. He's looking for opportunities. I would say those are including sexual opportunities in his case, yes. Because in one instance, Keith Richards and others intervened and basically told Jagger he was a sex addict and should get some treatment. In Richards' case, he's a completely different guy. Jagger, I don't think ever would have given in to drugs as being his real, drug of choice or, debauchery of choice. For him, it was always sex. He does workouts and so on. For Richards, heroin, here we come. Richards had a father who really had a nothing career, and he certainly didn't have a role model there. You get the most begrudging happiness out of Richards, and then you get disgust. I mean, this is the guy who maybe didn't write the lyrics, but he certainly wrote the music to I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And that's essentially, I think, how Richards has seen his life. Jagger might have wanted more satisfaction, but Richards didn't get any satisfaction.
And you've got the two radio shock jocks, Howard Stern, who is known very well in the UK, and Rush Limbaugh, who is not so well known in the UK, but very well known in the US. And again, they have different sets of emotions, though, on first appearance, they would appear to be doing the same job and doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, when voters weighed in, the people I asked to survey these celebrities, they put them in reverse order, but everybody chose anger and contempt for these two shock jocks. But they really are different. In Limbaugh's case, anger is what predominates. Anger, again, can be hitting out, that you are really rejecting someone in a way that you want to take a vindictive strike at them. You resent them. And I think in Limbaugh, who was just celebrated with an award by Trump in the last State of the Union address, Limbaugh is famous for trashing liberals. So he's very politically oriented. Stern just wants an outrageous guest on his show. I don't think he cares whether they're liberal or conservative necessarily. He does enjoy sex just like Mick Jagger, and satisfaction is the emotion that really weighs in for him. So they've both got anger involved, but it's much more prevalent in Limbaugh, who also combines it with disgust for his opponents that he trashes. And Stern's, much more the happy camper, not over the top happy camper. There's grumbling with him, but still there's a reasonable degree of happiness. So, they might be in the same profession. They might be labeled the same way. They're not the same two people.
Have you found doing in your study that the predominant emotions have changed? You mentioned earlier how, thanks to the paparazzi, Hollywood stars tend to now, more of them just do the begrudging smile. But have there been any other changes? Because, say, your book covers from 1930s movie stars through to the present time. Have there been any sort of significant changes that, I know, are people happier now or sadder now or angrier now, or have you noticed anything like that?
Yeah, there are two other changes. The degree of anger has gone up somewhat, and even more so, the degree of contempt has gone up. Someone once said that the Victorian era looked at the world through rose-colored glasses, and in the 20th century, we see them through jaundiced yellow glasses. or the world through jaundiced yellow glasses. Well, I think we've maybe even moved on to dark glasses after that or something else. Because, yes, in that swath, moving from essentially Judy Garland and Frank Sinatra in an earlier era, where, they had plenty of problems and travails. But I just think the whole mood's gotten a bit darker. And the sense of manipulation and spin out there and the hassles of life, it's a little bit grimmer picture. So the happiness has slipped away and it's been replaced by more anger and contempt.
Is the anger and contempt more in the entertainment type celebrities as opposed to the business or political and sports ones, or is it more or less across all areas that you cover in your book?
I did dissect that. I don't remember into specific categories especially well at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember that the athletes did not participate in the increase in contempt. They're maybe a little more fundamental and not thinking about the head games that people play. But the anger has gone up, and that might make some sense because you look at sports, the athletes are bigger, taller, heavier. When they crash into each other, whether it's on the, what you guys call the football field or the basketball court or anything else in life, those collisions are more vicious than they once were. We don't play with wooden rackets anymore. We now have people who try to take your head off with their 120-mile-an-hour serve. It's just a different world. So that makes some sense. So there were some differences within professions, but I can't go a whole lot deeper than that at the moment.
Hi, it's Jane here, and I have a special announcement. Just launched by your Weird Tales host, Charles Christian, we invite you to join our Weird Tales tribe with our new regular email newsletter called Weird Times. It's packed with fun stuff, all weird of course, which we know you love. Usual subjects like history, folklore, urban fantasy, but much more. So what's in it? Right, there'll be opinion pieces to stir discussion, your questions and answers, quizzes, competitions, interviews, plus tips and tricks, especially for all you writers and podcasts of the weird. So, have a look, join in the fun. Just send us an email headed Get Weird to urbanfantasist@icloud.com. Obviously, goes without saying, we will not share your data, ever. And, of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. So, to join us at Weird Times newsletter, just email urbanfantasist@icloud.com. We can't wait to hear from you.
As a epilogue to your book, you look at spotting deceit, lying, which is always a fascinating topic. And we had a South African serial killer profiler on, and she was talking about how when you talk to people, there are these various facial tells that people reveal, whether they're being truthful or not. Tell us a bit more about that, because that's a subject everybody try and work out when you're talking to somebody and looking at their faces and thinking, are they being straight with me or not?
Yeah, no, the media endlessly wants me to do that and, tell if they're lying or not. And, the fact of the matter is there is no lying muscle in the face. And that makes a lot of sense
Yes.
from a evolutionary point of view, because that would not be a good attribute to have.
Yes.
That would be weaned out of us over the course of evolution, because the telltale liars would be killed summarily by everybody else in the tribe or clan.
Yes.
So, in the modern age, you'd head to the Botox center or the plastic surgeon and have that little, reveal taken away. We're just like animals. We want camouflage. We want some ways to protect and hide ourselves. So we try to go to the poker face, to show nothing at all. But in fact, the face is the only place in the body where the muscles attach right to the skin. So there is quick, real-time data there for someone who will pay attention. So the next default that people will go to often is to try to mask things with the smile. And so we should start with the smile because it is the most common camouflage. You want to look for the rhythm of the smile. All expressions are rather brief and they kind of happen almost like a wave breaking on the shore at Southampton, wherever. So the wave gathers, it has a peak, and it lets go. And you're talking, just a few seconds. Might be, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds at most. Sometimes you'll have what's called a micro expression. It could be 1/6 of a second. It's there and gone. It's how they really feel, but you got to be quick to pick it up. So if you're looking for someone who's camouflaging with the smile, does it come on too quick? Is it the light bulb smile where it just booms and like, that's not natural. There's no gathering of the wave. It's just right to a peak. The second thing is the peak lasts too long. If someone, laughs at one of your jokes, Charles, for more than 4 or 5 seconds, they're probably brown nosing you.
Yes,
because that's just not natural.
Yeah.
You watch politicians in a debate. Their smiles go on and on and on and on because they're camouflaging.
Yes.
The last thing is they just drop it when it's done. I came up with this term thanks to Hillary Clinton, no less. I call it the guillotine smile. It just drops off the face. It doesn't kind of dissipate. It goes away abruptly. It's almost as if in her case, she's going to put it back in her pocket. She flashed the smile. She deployed the smile for political purposes, and now she's done with it. So you look for those things. You can also look and see if the smile comes on the face in a lopsided fashion, because when you're left-handed or right-handed, you often have a dominant part of the face, and you're kind of willing it onto your face. So the rhythm is a telltale sign. The fact that it's lopsided can be a telltale sign. It may be some other emotional signal that came on just before the smile, is reappearing after the smile, or is kind of baked in along with the smile, that there's more than one thing that's happening. That's entirely possible, and people certainly will go there. But smiles, are one thing. There is a punch list beyond that you can look to for someone lying. And I was going to say in Freudian slip terms, contempt. That is a pretty good place to start, because the most famous Ponzi scheme guy is, of course, Bernie Madoff. And here's where, if God has a sense of humor, it's a pretty vicious one. I mean, think of his last name, Madoff. He made off with other people's money. I mean, can you make this stuff up?
Yes.
As Mark Twain said, the only problem with fiction is it has to make sense.
Yes.
Real life never does. But it does in this case, because Bernie Madoff showed contempt. He did not respect other people. Anyone who was dumb enough to imagine that he was going to have these rip-roaring returns on your investments for you year in, year out, no matter what the market was doing, was obviously gullible, or lying to themselves and wishing everything was rosy. And he didn't respect those people. And so there's very little affect in his face, which is also worrisome, because people who don't emote a lot tend to be kind of that proverbial brick wall. That wives complain about, the non-communicative, non-caring, non-emotive husband, for instance. So he had a lot of that flat affect, and when he didn't have the flat affect, he mostly had smirks.
Yeah.
As if people didn't deserve the truth, and they didn't get it.
It seems some people suffer from, which is the bitchy resting face, where their face just naturally reverts when they're not doing anything to a slightly sneery look. I say we see it in the moment with our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and she's actually had people complaining that she smirks when she gives answers and things. But I think it's actually more down to her face, and I think J.K. Rowling gets a bit of that as well, that she pulls her face. I don't think she can turn on the celebrity smile, so she pulls her face, and it never quite comes across as a comfortable look.
Yeah, of those two, I know Rowling. I don't know the other person, but I can still comment on it. Let's start with Rowling. I mean, first of all, she felt like she was a hostage in her parents' household growing up. She was not close to either one of them. She didn't like them. She didn't respect them. She couldn't wait to get away from them. She basically feels the same way about, the media hounding her now that she's so famous and wealthy. So she is someone who does not trust other people. It started from the earliest part of her life onward. So I would say she's not a particularly happy person, so she's not likely to mug for the cameras. But she wouldn't do it anyway, because she can't do it, and she wouldn't do it. She just doesn't respect the media enough to want to even play the game necessarily. So she's a really good candidate for that. In terms of the resting bitch face, first of all, I'm a pretty big feminist, so I object to the term. It's not yours. We could call resting bastard face as well, and then we could, discuss all manner of people from Bill Gates onward regarding that. But I think there's a reason why it shows up in women, which is, it goes back to your question about gender. The one emotion where women came in higher than guys was happiness. And that makes some sense. I think one of the things we tend to look for or value, maybe stereotypically, unfairly in women is, they're a warm person, they're a nice person, they're a nurturing person, what we're looking for in our mother, for instance. So I think there's probably some social constraints put on women that makes them tend to go that direction. Well, in a model, it well could be that she, being very pretty, doesn't feel she has to go there. She's got a trump card, so to speak, and it's, her beauty. So she can be haughty. She can be the princess because she's got a currency that the world, respects, which is her attractiveness. It's the same thing that's sometimes said about guys. It's either because they're tall, so it's a physical attribute, or they're wealthy, for instance. Mm-hmm. And that's the power card that allows them to be as they are going to be. So I think it can come from certainly, a large, surfeit of attractiveness way beyond the average. It could come from power in the case of the person in the cabinet that you're referring to. It could come, of course, from financial well-being. It was not her most signature expression, but I remember really distinctly the very day that Martha Stewart was, chastised by the jury and found guilty on the insider trading. And a jury person said, I know the moment we decided to convict her. It was when she was on the stand and said, I don't make mistakes. And she said, everybody in the jury thought to ourselves, oh, honey, you just made a mistake. We don't like you anymore. And we're going to get you. So that's a lot of where contempt can come from. And, resting bitch face, resting bastard face, I think is all in that same territory.
And what about yourself? What are you planning for the future?
Well, I've written 8 books. My sister had 6 kids, and then she raised one other child of one of her daughters. So I outnumbered her by 1. I got to 8 offspring. She has 7. So I think I'm done. I think she's now old enough that I'm safely ensconced as having won the race against my younger sister. So I think I'm moving on from books. But I appreciate the question. I do have some things I'm doing. One is I'm actually, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to launch a podcast here very shortly. In the States, we have something called a New Books Network. It gets 800,000 downloads a month from people who like to follow people talking about various topics with authors of new books. So I'm going to be their newest addition to the cast. I am also going to be launching, once and if this virus will subside, both some EQ-related workshops, because my podcast is called the EQ Spotlight, or rather Dan Hill's EQ Spotlight, when it starts in early June. And then the thing I really want to do that I'm looking forward to, which relates a lot to Famous Faces Decoded, is I want to start launching some very biography-themed tours within America, and then ultimately I'd love to do one to Liverpool, I confess. In America, for instance, I'm thinking about one that would go from Memphis to Nashville, that would take you from sneering, disgust-ridden, Elvis Presley up to Dolly Parton's Nashville, and cover, kind of the characters involved in the music world from, the kind of the home of blues and rock and roll in the U.S. up to the country music, citadel. I want to do one in Washington where I'll take people to the National Portrait Gallery. We can go through all the presidents as they've been painted. And then we can move over to the U.S. Capitol, and they got all the statues in the rotunda at the U.S. Capitol building. So just various places in the country. I'd love to go to Silicon Valley. You got all the Silicon Valley tech giants. Yeah. They've got very different personalities.
Oh, yes.
So there's all sorts of places where I just like to explore America, but really through the lens of biographies and emotions with a kind of a theme per each, 3 to 4 or 5 day tour.
Right. Well, Dan Hill, thank you very much indeed for your time today. That's been great. Good luck with your projects in the future, as you say, when the lockdown finally ends.
Yes, God willing, indeed. So thank you very much for the conversation, Charles.
England, home to zombies, werewolves, green-skinned fairy folk? And how about dragons, strange monoliths and vampires? If you're fascinated by the bizarre and unexplained, join Charles on a road trip around the newly discovered walled Newton Triangle, where fact is much weirder than any fiction. Check out Charles Christian's fantastic Kindle book, A Travel Guide to Yorkshire's Weird Wolds, on amazon.co.uk and amazon.com.
And that's it. We're totally out of time again. But once more, a big thanks to our guest, Dan Hill. You can find him, along with details of all his books, on his website at www.sensorylogic.com. Next week, we have an interview with the lovely Vala Ventura. Vala is the author of several books on the paranormal, and she says she was introduced to the strange and unusual at a young age. Her first game was with a Ouija board, and family picnics in cemeteries were common outings. Sounds like my family, actually. She spent most of her formative years exploring graveyards, underground tunnels, and abandoned mansions in and around and under Nevada City in California. Vala will be talking to us about the great spiritualism boom of the late 19th and early 20th century, when seances, Ouija boards and charlatans were a regular form of entertainment for the chattering classes. Well, they didn't have Facebook in those days. We'll also be hearing of the novel Mark Twain's Ghost Dictated from Beyond the Grave. Yeah, really. And the grave legal dispute that followed its publication. Yes, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, those pesky lawyers will be in there somewhere. Oh, wait, hang on. I'm a lawyer as well, aren't I? Yeah. Anyway, now it just remains for me to say this is Charles Christian saying until the next time we're together, stay well, stay weird, stay different.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.